What if I told you there was a place during World War II where thousands of people were dissected alive without anesthesia? A facility so secretive, so horrific, that even decades later, many still struggle to believe the full truth. We often associate inhuman medical experiments with Nazi Germany, but hidden in the shadows of the Far East was a Japanese program that took cruelty to a new level. A place where human beings were treated not as prisoners, not even as enemies, but as mere objects. This place was Unit 731, and its dark legacy has been buried under layers of silence, denial, and historical neglect. Today, we're peeling back those layers to reveal Japan's most chilling wartime secret. Origins of Unit 731. Unit 731 was officially established in 1937 under the command of Lieutenant General Shiro Ishii, a microbiologist with twisted ambitions. Ostensibly created to promote public health and develop defensive capabilities against biological warfare, the true purpose of Unit 731 soon became far more sinister. Located in Pingfang, near Harbin in northeastern China, the facility operated under the cover of the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kwantung Army. But behind the name lay a death factory where scientific curiosity merged with military madness. What began as a controlled experiment center quickly spiraled into a sadistic laboratory. Though its original mission seemed noble, studying diseases, survival conditions, and medical responses for Japanese soldiers, it quickly turned into a hellish testing ground for unrestricted human experimentation. Initially, some of the tests were conducted on volunteers or prisoners with limited consent. But as the war intensified and Japan expanded its military campaigns across Asia, ethics were discarded and the victims were no longer volunteers. They were captives, prisoners of war, Chinese civilians, Koreans, Russians, and even children. The Marutas, victims reduced to logs. Inside the walls of Unit 731, victims were stripped not just of their clothes and dignity, but even of their identity. They were referred to as Marutas or logs, a cruel term meant to dehumanize them, as if they were nothing more than wooden materials to be chopped, dissected, and discarded. Estimates suggest between 10,000 to 12,000 people died inside Unit 731, but the true number may be even higher. These individuals were subjected to experiments that were neither necessary nor ethical, designed not for the benefit of medical science, but for developing biological weapons, testing the limits of human endurance, and fulfilling gruesome curiosities of wartime scientists. And all of this was done in complete secrecy, shielded from international oversight. Surgery on the living. One of the most horrifying practices at Unit 731 was vivisection, performing surgical procedures on living beings without anesthesia. Victims were deliberately infected with diseases like cholera, plague, anthrax, and typhoid, and then dissected alive so the researchers could examine the effects of the diseases on organs in real time, while the body was still functioning. Children, pregnant women, and the elderly were not spared. Organs were removed from the conscious victims while others watched. In some cases, limbs were amputated and reattached in bizarre positions, not for any medical purpose, but to test surgical endurance or observe shock. And once the body was used up, the victims were killed with injections or bullets if death hadn't claimed them first. Frostbite experiments. Unit 731 also carried out frostbite experiments under physiologist Yoshimura Hisato, who had a grim fascination with hypothermia. Prisoners were forced to submerge their limbs into tubs of ice-cold water. They were left exposed until their skin froze solid, sometimes to the point where their flesh would sound like wood when struck. The researchers would then test different thawing methods: hot water, open flames, or simply leaving the limbs to naturally warm in the air, while documenting the level of pain, infection, and tissue destruction. These tests were carried out without painkillers, and the victims were discarded like refuse once their usefulness expired. Turning people into targets. Unit 731 wasn't just a medical facility, it was also a weapons lab, and humans were its test dummies. Victims were used to test the sharpness and penetration of katanas, bayonets, flamethrowers, and explosives. Grenades were detonated near tied-up prisoners to study shrapnel injuries. Some were exposed to chemical weapons and poison gassed in specially constructed chambers. Spread of disease through rape and forced pregnancy. Some of the most disturbing acts involve the forced transmission of venereal diseases, especially syphilis. Male prisoners were deliberately infected and then ordered to rape female prisoners, sometimes also males, in order to monitor how the disease spread and affected different bodies. There was no consent, only cruelty. Women were forcibly impregnated, and then both mother and fetus were subjected to experiments. Some pregnant women were deliberately infected with diseases or wounded to examine how trauma affected fetal development. Others were vivisected mid-pregnancy so scientists could observe the fetus in utero. The researchers viewed both mother and child as nothing more than biological material. Pushing human limits. How long can a person survive without food or water? What happens to the human body under extreme pressure or trauma? Unit 731 sought to answer these questions in the most brutal ways imaginable. Some prisoners were locked in cells without food or water until they died, their suffering meticulously timed and recorded. Others were strapped to centrifuges and spun until they lost consciousness or their organs failed, mimicking conditions faced by pilots under extreme G-forces. Still others were subjected to high-impact trauma, like being crushed by weights or subjected to air crashes simulated in controlled settings. Each death was not a tragedy to the researchers, it was a data point. What happened after the war? As Japan faced defeat in 1945, Unit 731's commanders moved swiftly to destroy evidence. Laboratories were dismantled, bodies incinerated, and records burned. But the stench of what had occurred there could never be entirely erased. After Japan's surrender, many expected that the perpetrators of Unit 731 would face justice at the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal, just as Nazi doctors had at Nuremberg. But instead, General Douglas MacArthur and U.S. authorities made a deal. In exchange for the scientific data gathered through the experiments, the researchers of Unit 731 would be granted full immunity. Shiro Ishii and his team never saw a courtroom. Legacy of pain. While Japan's government remained largely silent, China built a museum on the site of the former Unit 731 complex in Harbin to ensure that the horrors would never be forgotten. Survivors and their families continued to speak out, demanding recognition and justice. And slowly, awareness of this dark chapter in history began to spread. Unit 731 is not just a tale of scientific cruelty, it's a reminder of what happens when morality is sacrificed on the altar of militarism, when human beings are reduced to data, and when justice is delayed in the name of convenience. It is a wound that still festers in the memory of those who remember and those who demand the world never forget. History isn't just what we remember, it's also what we choose to ignore. And Unit 731 stands as a chilling example of the atrocities that can flourish in silence. If you believe this story needs to be heard by more people, then share this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and make sure you never miss stories like these again. Subscribe for more powerful deep dives into the untold truths of history. Because some stories aren't just lessons, they're warnings.